Am I the bad one for choosing to protect my weaker child? I never thought I'd be the one sitting here telling this story. This house, it's never been this quiet. But this isn't a peaceful silence. It's a silence heavy with absence, the echo of doors that have been closed for the last time. Just last week, I stood outside the apartment of my eldest daughter, Eleanor. I hadn't seen her face to face in nearly a year, our only contact reduced to cold, sterile text messages and brief, obligatory calls on holidays. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the box of pastries, the kind she used to love as a child. When the door opened, she didn't look at me. Her eyes went to the box, then flickered over my face, devoid of any emotion. Her voice was flat, the voice of a polite stranger. "If you're here about Claire," she said, "you should just leave." And then the door closed. Not slammed in anger, but with a soft, definitive click. To me, that gentle click was more painful than 1,000 screams. It was the sound of a bond that had finally, irrevocably died. For you to understand how a mother could be met with such finality by the child she brought into this world, I have to go back to the beginning. Back to a time when I still believed I was a good mother, that my family was a happy one. My husband and I, we had 2 daughters, Eleanor and Claire. Eleanor was the eldest, 3 years older than her sister. From the moment they were born, they were 2 different worlds. Eleanor was fiercely independent, resilient, a force of nature. She learned to walk faster, talk sooner, and never seemed to need comforting. If she fell, she'd pick herself up, dust off her knees and keep running, even if they were scraped and bleeding. But Claire, my youngest, she was the opposite. She was delicate from birth, prone to sickness, a sensitive soul who was always clinging to my leg. She was the little bird with a broken wing, always in need of shelter and warmth. My husband and I, we always had a special kind of tenderness for Claire. Perhaps it's a primal instinct for parents. You feel this overwhelming urge to shield your more fragile child from the world. Eleanor, in her brilliance, never seemed to need that shield. She was always at the top of her class, the pride of our family. People would look at us and say, "You're so blessed to have a daughter so beautiful and accomplished." And we believed it too. We were proud of Eleanor, but our love, the kind of love that worries and frets and hovers, was unconsciously poured in its entirety into Claire. I remember one time when Eleanor was in the 5th grade, she won first place in the citywide public speaking competition. We had planned a grand celebration at a fancy restaurant. But just before we were set to leave, Claire came down with a high fever. She lay in bed, sobbing, saying she didn't want to be left alone. Without a moment's hesitation, my husband and I canceled the reservation. I stayed home to care for Claire, while my husband took Eleanor to a fast food place down the street. At the time, I noticed Eleanor was quiet, that she just methodically ate her meal. I told myself she was mature, that as the older sister, she understood the need to make sacrifices. But years later, I realized that in the eyes of that 10-year-old girl, there was a profound disappointment that I had chosen to ignore. I had told myself, "Eleanor is the strong one, she'll understand." That sentence, "Eleanor is the strong one," would become the justification for every biased decision I would make from then on. As they grew, the chasm between them widened. Eleanor got into the country's most prestigious university on a full scholarship, working part-time jobs to cover her own expenses. She never asked us for a thing. She was like a magnificent tree that grew towards the sun on its own, needing no one to tend to its roots. Claire, however, struggled. She failed her university entrance exams and ended up at a local community college. She had few friends and was plagued by insecurity. Every plan she made seemed to crumble. She wanted to open a flower shop. We gave her the money. It went bankrupt in 6 months. She wanted to take baking classes. We paid the tuition. She dropped out halfway through, claiming she had no talent. Every one of Claire's failures felt like a knife in my heart. I pitied her, and I felt it was my duty to compensate for her shortcomings. I thought, life has already dealt her such a poor hand. Her family must be the place where she receives every advantage. Sometimes, those advantages came at Eleanor's expense. The savings account we'd set aside for Eleanor's study abroad program was empty to pay off Claire's debts. A weekend we promised we'd spend visiting Eleanor in her dorm was canceled at the last minute because Claire wasn't feeling well. Through it all, Eleanor remained silent. Her silence was both a comfort and a source of a quiet, nagging guilt. I was relieved she never made a scene, never made things difficult. But deep down I knew I was being unfair. I would then quiet that guilt with my old refrain. I'm only doing this out of love. Eleanor has everything: success, beauty, a brilliant future. Claire has nothing. That's what family is for, isn't it? The strong are meant to lift up the weak. I was not a monster. I was a mother, doing what I believed was right to protect my vulnerable child. The tipping point, the beginning of the end, came when Eleanor brought Michael home to meet us. Michael was a wonderful young man, a talented architect who adored Eleanor. Seeing them together, I was genuinely happy for my daughter. My strong girl had finally found a steady shoulder to lean on. Michael became a regular presence in our home, and he was kind to everyone, especially to Claire. He noticed her shyness and would make an effort to draw her into conversations, bringing her small gifts. At the time I was pleased. I thought his presence might help Claire come out of her shell. I was blind to the fact that for a girl who starved for attention as Claire did, Michael's kindness was like a sweet, deadly poison. I had sown the seeds of my own family's tragedy with my blind love and toxic favoritism. I thought I was nurturing a wilting flower, not realizing I was poisoning the entire garden. Everything still seemed normal, right up until that fateful day. The day I learned I had shattered the lives of both my daughters. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time my daughter looked at me like I was a stranger, an enemy she hadn't yet identified. And that look, it still haunts my waking moments. The day Eleanor discovered the truth, the rain was pouring down in sheets, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for my family's tragedy. She had come home unexpectedly to retrieve some important documents for work, and she froze in the doorway of the living room, where she found Michael and Claire together. I won't describe the details of what she saw, but it was enough to shatter the world of a woman who was weeks away from her wedding day. I can still hear Eleanor scream. It wasn't a scream of anger, but of pure visceral pain. She didn't cry. She just stood there, trembling, staring at her sister and her fiancé. Instead of slapping Claire or screaming at Michael, Eleanor's first instinct was to turn and look at my husband and me, as we rushed out from our bedroom. Her eyes held a silent question. What are you going to do? And we did the worst possible thing. We chose to protect the weaker one. My husband tried to pull Eleanor aside, muttering senseless things like, "Calm down, and let's talk about this." But I ran to Claire, who had collapsed into hysterical sobs, her body shaking uncontrollably. I wrapped my arms around her. "It's okay," I whispered, "Mommy's here." I said those words to the daughter who had just destroyed her sister's happiness. In that moment, all I could see was how pathetic and fragile Claire looked. I was terrified she would fall apart, that she would do something drastic. I believed I was protecting my child. My warped logic was this: Eleanor was strong. She had always been strong. She had her career, her friends. She would survive this. But Claire was different. She had nothing. If her own family turned on her now, what would become of her? You can find another love, but you only have one family. That's what I tried to tell Eleanor as I pleaded with her to forgive. Claire made a foolish mistake, I said. And Michael is just as much to blame. But you're the older sister. You can't throw your own flesh and blood away for a man. Family has to come first. Eleanor looked at me, and for the first time she smiled. It was a smile more bitter and heartbreaking than any tears. "Family," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "Your family has always just been Claire. I was never a daughter. I was an achievement. An insurance policy that allowed you to pour all your resources into your real child, the one you actually loved." Her words were like daggers, but my blindness had made me numb to the pain. I only felt anger. I thought she was being selfish. And so she made her choice. Eleanor called off the wedding and cut Michael out of her life. Then she cut us out too. She packed a single suitcase and walked out into the rain that very night, leaving behind everything we had ever given her. Her last words to me were, "From now on, I'm living my own life. I will no longer be the strong daughter who carries everyone else's burdens. You go take care of your delicate daughter." The years that followed were lived in a quiet, fabricated peace. I convinced myself I had done the right thing. that Eleanor was just angry and that, in time, she would understand and come back. I poured all my energy into helping Claire recover. She was a wreck for a long time after Michael left her, too. She lived under the delusion that she was the victim, that her great love had been stolen from her. And I was right there, enabling that delusion. I catered to her every whim, took her on vacations, bought her anything she desired. I thought I was making amends. Meanwhile, Eleanor was silently rebuilding her life from the ashes. We only heard news of her through the grapevine of relatives. She had quit her job, started her own successful company, and built a new life for herself with new friends. She never once mentioned us. Every year on my birthday or on Christmas, she would send a short, impersonal text. And every time I received one, I would feel a pang of loss, but then I'd lie to myself thinking at least she still remembers me. 5 years passed. Claire's life had not improved. She'd met another man, but that relationship was also failing. And then another crisis struck. Claire and her boyfriend wanted a child, but they were unable to conceive. Doctors told them their only option was IVF, and the cost was astronomical. Every penny my husband and I had saved was long gone, spent on Claire's failed business ventures and whims. We had nothing left to give. And in my desperation, a selfish, sinful thought took root in my mind. Eleanor. Eleanor had money. She was successful. To her, this amount would be nothing. I told myself this could be an opportunity, a chance to heal the family. If Eleanor helped her sister, perhaps it would be the first step towards forgiveness, towards reconciliation. I clung to that foolish hope. I saw it as Eleanor's duty to help, as a way for her to atone for her sin of being so unforgiving. I didn't realize I was about to make my second great mistake, one even more cruel than the first. I picked up my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I found her name, cold and distant, on my screen, took a breath, and made the call that would set the final, all-consuming fire. We met at a quiet cafe, a place I had chosen in the vain hope that its serene atmosphere could soothe the tension between us. Eleanor arrived precisely on time. The woman who sat across from me was now 31, poised, confident, radiating an aura of success. She wore an elegant business suit, a stark contrast to the heartbroken girl who had fled into the rain years ago. She ordered a black coffee and waited, her expression unreadable. Not a single word of greeting, not a hint of a smile. I started cautiously asking about her work, her life. She answered in short, polite but distant sentences. Finally, unable to bear the pretense any longer, I got to the point. I told her about Claire's situation, about her desperate wish to be a mother, about the crushing cost of the IVF treatments. I tried to soften my words. I know I have no right to ask this, Eleanor, but Claire is your sister. She's paid dearly for her mistakes. This is her only chance at happiness. Please, if you could help her, it could be a chance for our family to heal. Eleanor listened in complete silence, her long fingers tapping lightly on her cup. When I finished, she looked directly into my eyes, and I saw that the pain and disappointment were gone. In their place was a chilling emptiness. "You're mistaken, Mother," she said, her voice calm. "You didn't come here to ask for my help. You came here to demand I pay a debt I don't owe. You want me to take my money, earned with my own sweat and tears, and use it to buy happiness for the very person who destroyed mine. And you dare to call that healing? No. That is an insult." I was stunned. "How can you be so cold? She is still your sister." "My sister." A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "A sister doesn't sleep with her sibling's fiancé. And a mother doesn't defend the child who is in the wrong, while blaming the one who was the victim. It wasn't that you didn't know right from wrong, Mother. It's that you chose not to see. You chose to protect Claire, not because she was weak, but because protecting her made you feel like a great sacrificial mother. My strength was just a convenience. It allowed you to neglect me without the inconvenience of guilt." Every word she spoke stripped away the lies I had been telling myself for years. But instead of seeing the truth, my pride flared up. I began to cry, using tears as a weapon, as I always had. I spoke of my pain, of our broken family. But Eleanor was no longer moved. She stood up and placed a bill on the table to cover both our coffees. "I won't give her a single penny," she said. "Claire's life is the result of her choices and yours. You deal with it." I am not anyone's redemption. The confrontation didn't end there. In my desperation a few days later, I made the most foolish decision of my life. I took Claire to Eleanor's office building. When she was refused again, this time to her face, Claire finally snapped. She lunged at Eleanor, screaming and clawing like a wild animal. Security had to intervene and call the police. Claire was arrested for assault, right there in the lobby of her sister's company. That was when the bomb went off. An employee had filmed the entire incident and posted it online. The story of the two sisters, the successful one and the failed one, along with the ugly truth of the affair from years ago, went viral. Our private family tragedy became a public spectacle. The judgment of strangers rained down upon Claire and me. What kind of a sister is that? The mother is blindly biased. No one is obligated to save the people who threw them away. The reputations of both my daughters were destroyed. Eleanor, though the victim, was tainted by the public scandal. But it was Claire who lost everything. Her company fired her. Her boyfriend, seeing the truth of her character for the first time, left her. She spiraled into a deep depression, locking herself in her room, a prisoner in the very home where her downfall began. My husband and I became pariahs among our own relatives and friends. So now I sit here in this empty, silent house. Eleanor is gone for good. Her only communication is through a lawyer to her father, settling final affairs. Claire is lost in a darkness of her own making, a darkness I helped create. I have finally faced the consequence of my favoritism. A shattered family, 2 daughters drowning in their own misery, and a future with no escape. I was wrong. I know now that I was wrong to constantly protect the child I saw as weak, at the expense of the strong one. But every time I search my soul, a voice still whispers back. It's a mother's instinct. You protect the child who needs you most. Perhaps I will live with that excuse for the rest of my days. I tried to protect my child, and in doing so I destroyed her. And now, in this terrifying silence, I realize the weakest, most pitiful person of all was me. If a mother's love can be this destructive, then perhaps the only kind act I have left to offer my children is to disappear from their lives forever.